Hello, what's shaking, everybody? Welcome back to another edition of the Orange Bloods Texas Football Channel. I'm Geoff. That's Anwar. Today's video brought to you by Underdog Fantasy, the best and easiest way to play fantasy football. No waves, trades, lineup setting. There's no league management aspect after you draft. That is the key. Sign up right now with the code above my head, the Underdog Orange Bloods YouTube code, and get a free deposit to match up to $100 in bonus cash. Whether you're playing one day, pick 'em, whatever, they've got you covered. That's kind of what Underdog Fantasy does. We love the fact that they have jumped onto the Orange Bloods bus. Woo-hoo! You can use their mobile app. You can use their user-friendly site. There's a lot of different things that you can do. The bottom line is let Underdog Fantasy be your home for fantasy. It's that time of the year. NBA playoffs, Major League Baseball, even more so than fantasy football. This is the time of the year where you can really get your one-day gambling fix every day. So you can do weekly gambling, but once a day, it's like the best of both worlds, thanks to Underdog Fantasy. The thing that Anwar and I are talking about today, we've challenged each other. Single biggest surprise in all of spring football for the University of Texas thus far, going into the spring game this weekend. Anwar, and by the way, leave your comments in the comments section if you have an answer to this question. Like the video, subscribe, do all that stuff. Anwar, your single biggest surprise of the spring so far is ...
Ja'Tavion Sanders. And, you know, you would say, why is he surprised? Well, because he's a former 5-star. But Ketch, this is a guy we've been asking about ever since he stepped on campus. Where's Ja'Tavion? Where's Ja'Tavion? Where's Ja'Tavion? You know, we've heard a lot last year, Ketch, about Gunnar Helm, how good he had played, Juan Davis, how good he was. And Ja'Tavion's always kind of been like that guy that seemed to be on the outs. They go ahead and bring in Jahleel Billingsley from Alabama. And now you're thinking to yourself, boy, it's about to get tight in that room. It's going to be tight on Ja'Tavion. A Catch, it's been the opposite. All we have heard about is how well he's played, how good of a pass catcher is, how good of a blocker is. I mean, we all know first guy off the bus, Ja'Tavion is that guy that you want off the bus, but we just hadn't heard him be that kind of impact player. And again, bringing in a guy like Jahleel, and look, to the point, it's spring, right? Things could change in the fall, and that's always on the table. But if you're saying it like right now, as we record this in April, knowing that Ja'Tavion has kind of gone from that guy where you're just like, is it going to click, to it finally clicking and looking good for me, definitely from a positive aspect, is definitely my biggest surprise.
Hey, that's a great answer. And I'm glad you didn't steal mine. And I also didn't think about Ja'Tavion, but I think you're exactly right. I have to fess up. I was kind of worried about Ja'Tavion Sanders simply because it had been we live in a world where a dude can be unhappy for 5 minutes and go get into the portal. And I'm not anti-portal, right? I mean, if a guy is unhappy and he thinks he can be happier in his life to make a different decision, then go on, young man, throw yourself in the portal. Devin Askew from the Texas basketball team just landed in the portal. And my first thought on that, I have two thoughts on that, right? It's like, for Texas basketball, like another guy that has to be replaced. But on the same hand, it's like, the guy's unhappy. Like, I'm not going to begrudge him trying to find happiness. And I wondered if Ja'Tavion Sanders' slow start would make him a candidate. Because if that dude puts himself into the portal, he's got the list of, he would essentially be the top of the portal availability list. And I think who's who of schools would be interested in him. So there's been a part of me that was like, man, maybe it's just not this is just really a continuation of a thought process that I had going back to last year, where, like you said, we kept waiting for Ja'Tavion Sanders to emerge. He played. It wasn't like he wasn't playing in games. I think he played in 10 or 11 or maybe even all 12 games last season, but there was never a breakout moment. There was never a moment where you went, aha, there's that 5-star that we're all waiting to see. And when that happens, there's a part of you that wonders in 2022, that dude going to put himself into the portal? Is that guy unhappy with what's going on? Like, what's up with him? And I wondered partly, like, if he got through the spring and it felt like it still wasn't happening for him, what might that mean? He's been one of the biggest guys talked about in the spring, and it's different than a year ago. People saw his body and his physicality, if you will, just as an athlete. And they thought when he arrived last summer, keep an eye on that dude. But then when the football started, the rave reviews kind of stopped. Not now. And, you know, it seems to be increasing with speed. I think the biggest question moving forward with Ja'Tavion Sanders now isn't where is he? Is he going to make it? Was it you know, whatever those questions are, I don't want to say bust because I never thought that, but the things that people think, now I just wonder, how does Steve Sarkisian get him the ball when this is a Texas offense with a lot of mouths to feed? And the offense a year ago didn't exactly go through the tight end. You could make a case. Maybe one of my early season predictions is that we'll get into the season, Anwar, and he'll be the guy that, you know, last year was kind of Keelan Robinson. Oh, they got to find a way to get Keelan 5 touches per game. I think that might be Ja'Tavion Sanders this year. It might be. You've got to find a way to get him involved in the offense. Give him a cookie or two, 5 or 6 passes a game. And it's hard. It's easier said to talk about it than to do it in reality. And I think it's one of the challenges that this offensive coaching staff will have. How do you get that dude the ball when, you know, I think you kind of have to, but it may not be the natural thing inside of this offense.
And here's the thing, Ketch. I mean, one of the things that I think was a big question mark for a lot of us was just, should this guy just go on defense? Like, it seemed to be the more natural thing. You know, first of all, you think to yourself, hey, if your goal is to play on Sundays, the easiest path for you is going to be on the defensive line. Like that's just the easy path for you. It's that you have the occasional tight end, like there's the guy from Florida, you know, last year that everyone fell in love with, but that's like kind of the anomaly, Catch. But the defensive linemen are the ones that you can have multitude of those guys go early. So you start thinking, so, all right, you want to ride with this whole offense thing? You really want to do this tight end of all positions? Like, you know, it's almost like saying, like, I'm really going to take all my talents and to be a long snapper. You're like, you sure this is what you're going to do? Okay, it's not that bad. But you get what I'm saying. Of all the positions. And, you know, this is one of those times where I was like, so, you know, we've had people on Orange Blood saying, like, you know, when it would come up, like, our best defensive end is playing tight end right now.
Yeah.
So now that he's shifting and now he's starting to accelerate, yes, now it becomes a question of how do you get him the ball that kind of adds in, to your point, the weapons that, you know, Texas seems to be amassing on offense. And again, Catch, it's not to say once we get into the fall, Jahleel Billingsley doesn't catch up at all and maybe doesn't overtake him. Like, I'm not saying that not happening, but as of right now, you know, Jahleel's behind him. Tremendous talent, but he's only been on campus for a few months. Ja'Tavion, the way he's been doing it, has been definitely impressive. So, you know, hats off to that young man.
Yeah, I think the fact that we'll go into the spring game on Saturday and Texas fans are clamoring to see Ja'Tavion Sanders on offense. The conversation will, especially if they don't get O'Shawn Mathis, there'll be an outpour of Ja'Tavion should be on defense because who the hell else does Texas have to fill potentially this really critical role? But I think going into Saturday's scrimmage, game, practice, walkthrough, whatever it's going to be called, I think there will be a thirst to see this Ja'Tavion Sanders character, who Texas fans really haven't seen yet in burnt orange, look like that guy. Like I said, he played last year, but I don't know that that casual fan would have even noticed. I think they might have thought, well, did he redshirt? Well, no, he was getting onto the field, special teams, whatnot, but he wasn't a major part of the offense, to say the least, in a year when the tight end, I don't want to say it was an afterthought, but it was kind of an afterthought in terms of being used as a weapon. And, you know, there were the jokes of Cade Brewer constantly under Tom Herman, lining up, split out wide in a 4-wide receiver set, and basically just taking up space. There was less of that in year one under Sarkisian. They did a better job of getting, I think, the right personnel out on the field. It didn't always include the tight end. I think finding ways to get him and Gunnar Helm, for that matter, who's also had a really good spring. Mm-hmm. And if Jatavian Sanders didn't exist, maybe Gunnar Helm is a candidate for one of these, who's the biggest surprise in camp so far. Sure. He was a guy that made waves a year ago at this time, got a little banged up, kind of got sucked into he's just a freshman and how much can you really expect from a guy? But I think he's back, and those two guys together have both really kept Jahleel Billingsley off the field. And just to put a ribbon and bow on this part of this video's discussion, I thought the arrival of Billingsley was a shot across the bow to a certain extent for Jatavian Sanders. Maybe not, they're not the same guy, but it was like, he's a player that you need to get involved. He's too talented, too important to the program to not have involved, and to bring another guy into his position when you already thought that position was adequately filled at the very minimum, I think made me wonder, maybe they don't believe in Jatavian Sanders. And it doesn't feel like, as we exit the spring, that's part of the conversation at all. It feels like moving forward that Jahleel Billingsley is going to have his hands full. And if Jahleel Billingsley is going to be an impact player in 2022, he's got to go through Jatavian Sanders, and we may be reaching a point in Sanders' career where that's a lot easier said than done, because no offense to Jahleel Billingsley, Jatavian Sanders is the most talented guy in that tight end room. And it's just a matter of, can that kid get his finger on the light switch? It feels like he has. I think it's a great answer to the question of who the biggest, she shouldn't be. You almost shouldn't be qualified to be the biggest surprise if you're a 5-star coming into the program, but it had been that quiet surrounding him going in that it's this loud going out. We certainly weren't predicting this a month ago, right? We were doing spring predictions. I don't remember either, because I think we'd be tooting our horn right now and being like, I called it, and like that's not quite what's happened. So I think that's a good call.
Right.
If I'm torn.
Okay.
Between what I think my two biggest surprises are.
Okay.
And I think these will be Anwar horn tooting moments, because it's either Marcus Washington at wide receiver, right? Mm-hmm. So I got Marcus in this hand, or I've got Jaylan Ford in the other. And they're both very different, but they both make can I do both? Can I just give a shout out? I'll tell you what,
it's a hell of a tie. It's a hell of a tie. I don't know how you break it.
I will pick one, but I want to give them both their love. I won't go too deep into the Marcus Washington bit, because we talked a lot about that yesterday on the Monday Overreaction show, which if you haven't checked out, I thought was one of our better Monday Overreactions. We really talked a lot of spring football. So there's a lot of this kind of conversation baked into that video. I talked about how my expectations were that Isaiah Nayor, by this point in the spring, would be a very buzzy name. And it's not to say that he hasn't been. Like, I'm not really poo-pooing on Isaiah Nayor as much as I'm giving props to Marcus Washington for playing at a level that's not making it easy for the incoming transfer to just take his job. But I think I'm going to go with Jaylan Ford, because if you'd asked me going into the spring, does Texas need to take a transfer linebacker almost at all costs, I would have said yes. There's a part of me that still feels that way. But in the last few weeks, as Ford has played better and constantly been a guy whose name gets mentioned as he had a good practice, he's doing good things with DeMarvion Overshown. You've heard his name a lot. There's been a part of me that I'm still all for Texas bringing in what might be an upgraded linebacker, but I have found myself looking at the players that they're looking at, whether it be a guy like Caleb Johnson, who was in town yesterday from UCLA, former Longhorn, as weird as that is, to talk about a former Longhorn potentially transferring back to Texas. Lorenzo McCaskill, the kid out of Louisiana. I've looked at some of the names that they've looked at, and I have found myself saying, is that guy really going to beat out Ford? You know, like I'm putting enough respect on his name that a guy like Caleb Johnson, who has started, I don't know, 21 of the last 22 games at inside linebacker for UCLA and been a solid player. I mean, if this was Caleb Johnson 2 seasons ago coming out of UCLA, you're talking about a guy that had 5.5 sacks from the inside linebacker position. That tapered off. Can't even say tapered off when it turns into 0 the next year. He fell off a mountain. But I found myself looking at guys that are proven starters in major conferences, or a guy like McCaskill, who is a plus player for a good team in a lower level conference. And I have found myself saying, not convinced that they'll beat out Jaylan Ford. I keep waiting for the name to emerge at linebacker that Texas would have. And there's been a couple of them, but they didn't go to Texas, right? We think about the Windman kid out of UNLV that ends up going to Michigan State. There have been guys that Texas has looked at that I would go, oh yeah, that's an upgrade. Ford's done enough this spring that a warm body isn't enough to simply say that's an upgrade over the guy that's already on the field. And I just wasn't thinking about that with Ford going into the spring. I really thought they've got to get somebody. And now my frame of mind is they've got to get somebody if that somebody is really good. Otherwise, maybe use that slot somewhere else unless you absolutely think that you need depth. Because right now, the other guys compared to Ford feel like depth options as opposed to surefire, walk them onto the field, which is what I thought Nair was, to be completely fair, which is why Marcus Washington is my other guy, because they've already pulled the guy that looked like a surefire starter in Nair, and Washington's playing at a high enough level at going into his senior year that that's turned into a real battle, and far from a layup for Nair in terms of just taking all of the reps. So those are my main 2 guys. Ford is the one that surprises me the most, because every time someone goes into the portal, I've been thinking to myself, can that guy replace Ford? And I've almost been looking for guys that, you know, almost anything will do. And then the reality is, as we get towards the end of April, Anwar, there aren't that many guys in the portal that I think are absolute upgrades over Ford, which says a lot about the development that he's made.
Yeah, no, I think it's a valid point. You know, Catch, we would look at like a guy, like we've been talking about, like a guy Hall, right? We start thinking about, okay, maybe he's there for depth, but you can talk yourself into, you know, him possibly being in the top 3 if all goes well, you know, getting a lot of playing time, because you could see that he matches evenly. To your point, when you're looking at certain guys in a portal as it relates to Jaylan Ford, you're just saying, okay, well, that guy can come off the bench like that. If you're looking for some depth, like if you want to use a number on that's what you're using it for. But it's not the upgrade, you know, that we thought it was. It's not, you know, probably positive thing, Catch. It's not that desperate, like, oh my God, like where it is now. They need some depth at that position. Like, don't get me wrong, Catch. But it's not as dire, I think, because of Jaylan Ford and what he's been able to do in this entire spring. But you know, I'm with you, Catch. You know, obviously, you know, I've been, you know, talking about Jaylan Ford for a while, and so, you know, I appreciate that. And the Marcus Washington thing too, Catch. I'm 100% with you. It's a tough one to choose between those two, just because, you know, we talked about like Monday overreaction. Guy, it would very easily, like, I'm from St. Louis. Why am I here in Texas? My receivers coach is gone. My head coach is gone. I'm not dealing with this. Not getting a lot of run, and him staying the course and fighting it through. Very impressive. And again, you know, where we are today, where we are in August, maybe 2 totally different things. But, you know, Jaylan Ford, you know, with the thing that they needed, Catch, is they needed one of these linebackers to really, you know, step up. Maybe the absence of Luke Brockermeyer, you know, this spring aids that, you know, and gives some more guys an opportunity. to get on the field and really showcase what they have. But I mean, I'm a huge Ford fan, so you had me hello the moment you said Jaylan Ford.
Last thing I'll say about Ford, they desperately need more out of the linebacker position this year than they got a year ago. What's changed is Ford is raising his hand and offering that he can be that guy that can raise his level of play up. I mean, they need some game. My biggest question mark, and maybe this is a video for later on after the spring, but it's, what are your biggest concerns? And I think defensively, we touched on it a little bit in the overreaction show. It's just, where are the playmakers? Who's making game-changing plays on this defense? Ford has to emerge. If Ford doesn't emerge into a playmaker, then I'm wrong on this video. It means he wasn't eventually good enough to be the answer that they need in the middle. What I think is being suggested this spring by his play is that he's got a chance to be that guy. I think there are warm bodies that can help Texas if they just need to put a finger in a dike and say, don't let any water come through this hole. There are guys out there that can do that. In order for this defense, though, to really take a step forward, they need somebody that can climb over the dike and do something. And Ford's got to be that guy. If you're asking me now, will he? I don't know. But that I don't know, and I'm not answering positively, no, they got to find somebody else. It's a real nuanced, modest jump, but it's a big leap, I think, that's been made, and that I think there's a very small group of guys that can probably be better than him. And it's about now, how good can he get? I think that, he's entering his third season. He's going to be a junior. Some people could say he's right on time, and that it's only the absurd needs. We do this at the quarterback position all the time. Yeah. It's like, oh my God, this guy sucks. It was like Hudson Card. It's like, oh, we got to give up on Card. It's like, well, wait a minute. He was a freshman, and that Arkansas game was if we did that to every position on the field, there'd be no players left. You could make the case that Ford, from a developmental point where he was as a recruit and everything else, is right on time where he should have been expected to be potentially a really good impact player. And only the needs of Texas and the inadequacies across the board amongst his peers put him into a position where he had to try to do it before he was ready. Maybe he's ready now. And if he's truly ready to be that guy, then Texas making a big, bold improvement at a crisis area from a year ago internally with one of their own guys is like finding $100 bill on the street. Maybe it fell out of your wallet, maybe it didn't, but you feel like you found something. And it's kind of what Texas has done here. It feels like maybe they found something in Ford that it didn't have a year ago, and it has a chance to be immensely valuable to this year's defense.
Okay, so the only ones that, we'll see what anyone else says. There may be some honorable mentions here with the Jaron Thompsons or Jahdae Barron of the world. So just as honorable mentions, just, throwing it out there. For me, I've already given mine, but both guys have been, Jahdae is clearly standing out, and so is Jaron.
Hayden Connor would have been my third. Considering he's been a guy that's played a little left tackle this spring, and it doesn't feel like from what they currently have, he represents a major downgrade when he goes from guard. He's going to be a guy that potentially holds off a freshman. Maybe not, but he's put himself very quickly into a position where it feels like he's in the inner circle of trust for Kyle Flood. And he wouldn't have been there a year ago, but maybe he's in there with 3 or 4 other guys right now. And I think that's pretty critical. Look, give us your opinions. I mean, you've heard our cases. We really made them for 3 because I gave Marcus Washington like a 1B. But if you had to pick one of the single most surprising positive performance from a player so far this spring. Let us hear it in the comments section. Like this video if we've entertained you, informed you, told you something that you hadn't otherwise heard even once. Just give us a like, subscribe to the channel. We will have more throughout the week leading up to the spring game, including this week's, live, as we always do, the modcast on Thursday. Sounds like we'll be getting Sarkisian talking to the media a couple of hours before we go live with the modcast. So a lot of stuff here on the Texas Football Orange Bloods channel to consume over the course of the coming days, leading into the spring game, spring scrimmage, whatever it officially is called. Don't you dare go. I'm not going to tell you to just stay on our page and hit refresh 45 times a day. Just subscribe to the channel, get the notifications, and then you don't have to be OCD about it. Just let the good news be delivered to you whenever the good news is there. For myself and Anwar Richardson and his lovely Ricky Bobby, if you ain't first, your last shirt.
I love it.
We'll talk to you later in the week. You guys be good to each other. Later.